Good afternoon, everyone. Hello and welcome to South by Southwest and this amazing panel. We've got some amazing panelists and speakers with us this afternoon to talk a little bit about the intersection of AI, storytelling, its impact on communities, and how those communities will be impacted by the use of technology and AI and storytelling and representation. As you already know, marginalized and impacted communities are going through so much in our society today, and we just want to talk about how AI will actually impact storytelling and how it'll impact those of us who want to make sure that our voices are heard, that our stories are told in an accurate manner, and that that the country at large and the industry understands our stories. And we've got some amazing panelists with us. You all have their bios. We have Sophia Gori. I'm going to allow each individual to introduce themselves a little bit and allow themselves to talk a little bit about what they do as well in the beginning, and then we'll get into questions, some moderated questions, and then we'll open it up to you all to make sure you also have a chance to talk to our experts about AI storytelling and its impact on communities here. So I'm going to actually just open it up and allow the folks to make some introductory remarks. And the question that I want to ask, which is I think on all of our minds, which is a question that we all struggle with, those of us who work in the public space, in the policy space, in the storytelling space, is how AI, the intersection of artificial intelligence, storytelling, and its impact on communities. So I just want to open up how each individual up here, each expert up here, what they do, their role, and how they intersect and engage in this process. What is it that they do and their specific roles in terms of how their day-to-day, every single day that they, in terms of their professional work and even their personal work, how it intersects with AI, storytelling, and the conversation that we have today. So I'm going to open up with Sophia, and I'd like for you to just quickly also mention what you do and where you are and how you interact with this subject.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks, Haris. Thank you all for being here today. I just tell you a little bit about myself. My day job, I'm a lawyer, so I'm from DC. I probably have the most boring job of everyone here in the room. But I am a consultant, and I work for many tech companies, probably the majority of the big tech companies, helping them think through government regulations. So Haris and I our careers have overlapped. But I worked in government at the State Department for many years, and so I've transitioned now in the private sector, where I help think about how governments and tech should be thinking about regulations. So I do a lot of work in the AI space, and I was recently at the Global AI Summit in New Delhi. So that's my day job. My other job is I'm the chair of the MPAC board. So I spend a lot of time thinking about how these issues impact our community. And my first job out of law school was actually working at MPAC. So it's an organization that I'm deeply, it's a part of me, and I feel very, very much that embedded in the organization. So those are sort of my two roles when why I'm here on this panel today.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Kristen Stewart, please introduce yourself and how you interact with this subject and this topic.
Thank you, Harris, and thank you to MPAC also for this opportunity to have this conversation today. It is incredibly important, especially with what's going on today with digital technology and the storytelling and the challenges we've always had and what will happen in the future. I lived in that world for a number of years. I was both the head of creative, so I was at, I ran networks, I ran the CBC, Hallmark channels globally. I have been on the side of being the gatekeeper when it came to content and reaching audiences. I will hope that in my time at both at CBC and at Hallmark and other places that I was actually able to encourage the diversity of the voice that I know is so necessary. So I've seen firsthand the benefits of creating opportunities for diverse voices to actually have access to audiences who are there, who want to hear them. And then I took the big jump to flip over from the head of the CBC to running
Can
Twitter.
you say what the CBC is?
Oh, sorry, the CBC is the Canadian Broadcasting Corp. So I'm not an American, but I'm sitting here and I do live in Hollywood now, and I have crossed the border back and forth quite a few times. Moving from the CBC to head up Twitter North America, and moving to the technology space, which I thought was a huge opportunity, because I do get excited about every digital disruption that comes. It does enable different ways to tell stories. And I think the question that we're all trying to answer now, and which is what I try to help companies and producers who are trying to enter the space and keep relevant, is to understand where the tools are helpful and where they can be applicable and where they can help magnify and amplify our stories. And so that's what I do now, is I help in consulting those companies to understand where they can use technology to better their storytelling.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kristen. Noha Mustafa, please talk a little bit about what you do and how you intersect in this space.
Sure. It's very nice to be here, and thank you all for being here. My name's Noha Mustafa. I am also a lawyer, sadly. I started my career at a law firm doing some pretty boring, like, white-collar government investigations work. I left that and went and did some refugee asylum work abroad in Amman, Jordan. And then I came back from that and I joined Google, where I'm now on our data disclosure team. The data disclosure team is the team that receives requests from both the US government and foreign governments for user data and information, and then assesses whether it's legal, what can be disclosed, when it can be disclosed, how much of it can be disclosed, et cetera. And so you can imagine my job is pretty closely related in that we are interacting often with teams that are deciding on, like, the length of how long your data is retained, what is retained, what gets disclosed, what the classification of the types of data is. And obviously, the more tools that we have to collect data, the more data that companies have. And so AI is one of those tools. And I'll talk a little bit about that as our panels talk about government regulation and technology. I will say that the views expressed are my own. They are not those of the company. And I'll be speaking as an individual and as a lawyer, obviously informed by my experiences, but they will be my views.
Thank you, Noha. And I actually want to reiterate that point, that the views and the words expressed here are representative of personal opinions, not necessarily the institutions that each of our amazing experts belong to. And I also forgot to introduce myself. My name is Haris Tareen. I'm the Vice President of Policy Programming here at the Muslim Public Affairs Council. And I'll start with you, Kristen, and then we can all expand on this. We want to make this as conversational as possible, and then we'll include you all as well. AI is often described as democratizing technology. We've seen over the past 2 decades how technology companies have been able to really monopolize conversations online, and governments have not been able to really regulate the industry. I mean, government. I'm in Washington, D.C. I realize how government is completely out of date with the advancement of technology. The largest technology regulation that was implemented by Congress was in the 80s, which is absolutely crazy if you think about all of the advancements that have been done. So AI is often described as democratizing technology. In what ways can AI tools actually expand opportunity for marginalized and minority communities to tell their own stories? And we're talking about storytelling here, right? How can we use AI to actually tell our own stories? Wu-Tang just came out with a all AI music video that was absolutely amazing. I was just at the premiere of that. But how can AI be used by more minority and marginalized communities to actually tell their own stories and enhance their stories.
Sure. Way to slip in there that you got a Wu-Tang invitation. That's pretty cool. Yeah. So, I think, again, and I take your point around how challenging it is to, and I think we'll have a much more fulsome conversation around regulation and what that means today. When technology is moving so quickly, it reinvents itself every week. And so it's going to be hard, I think, to put guardrails around things that haven't yet even been invented. But we can talk about that because there obviously are ways to approach that. But in terms of a technology being able to democratize, and we did the same. So when I was at Twitter, I was there pre-IPO, through the IPO, a few years into it. I was there for about 6 years altogether. And I think there was very much a sense that this was going to be a form of technology that was going to give everyone a microphone, right? That was the democratization of a platform, the social media platform that Twitter was promising or was hopeful about delivering, was the opportunity for everybody, no matter where they were, to have access to the mic. Then you saw the very encouraging moments like Arab Spring. You saw Black Twitter. You saw a lot of things develop that actually were the like the foundation of what Twitter was trying to become at the time. And we can fast forward and see where that's ended up. But I think there are moments in time when a new technology gets introduced that we have an opportunity to learn and embrace those things. And I remember at the time when Twitter was first starting out, and you could see the power of the communities actually driving the development of Twitter and the expansion of Twitter and the engagement on Twitter. That was, I think, a headwind that was, we can look to when it comes to new technologies like AI. And so the democratization, with access points and everything aside, I think this particular democratization has given more data and information to the hands of the creators. We now have a world where creation is the least least problematic, the lowest bar to actually cross in order to get, everyone has a phone. As soon as we put cameras into phones and put phones into everybody's hands, lots of people became creators. That's wonderful. What we have a problem with, though, is discovery. And what AI can do is help you with discovery. So I do think that there's, within the technology, tools that can help empower the individual who's trying to create a relationship directly with their audience that they should have and that they could have had, but with under a lot more challenge than you can have today, because now you can have access to the data at your fingertips. You can have, there is just it creates another tool set that you can use to skip the gatekeeper. Yeah. I've been a gatekeeper. Now it's time to kind of, we got to jump the gatekeepers. We just heard in the last panel, if you were here, the frustrations around people trying to convince gatekeepers that making good programming is to their benefit, to their business imperative. Maybe it's time to stop trying to convince those people, and maybe it's time to start reaching out directly. So if this is any way in which we can give people the power to not just democratize the creation of content, but the distribution of it, and then own the model around it, and the revenue, and so on, then that's, I think, is going to be, it's a matter of figuring that out.
So that's a good segue to what you do, Noha. I know you're in Washington, D.C., and you're a lawyer, and you said it's really boring. But I spent a few years in government at the Department of Homeland Security, and we were constantly engaging tech companies at DHS, and we were trying to kind of figure out. And when it comes to government, the government wants to control the narrative. The government wants to keep the status quo. That's what we do as governments. We want to make sure that we're ahead of every conversation that's out there. That's what government does. But I'd love to hear from you, especially from where you sit. Governments are heavily invested in AI, right? Not just our government, but internationally, right? We saw President Trump go to the Gulf just a few months ago. There was almost $1 trillion worth of investments in AI and in data centers, and just so much conversation around that. Yet regulations are lacking to protect communities, to protect the civil rights, civil liberties of marginalized communities, right? Those who don't have access, right? Those who don't have access to Silicon Valley and all of that. How do you see government oversight and regulation as developing in this space, and the role that it can play in actually being a positive factor in those communities that don't usually have access and that need access to AI, and to also tell their stories and to be able to make sure that their stories are being told?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I do love my job, so I'm just gonna correct that one. You mentioned that the last real regulation in the U.S. By Congress on like really electronic privacy was in the 80s. It was in 1986. Yeah. It's the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, and that's like statute governs my entire existence. And it's incredibly outdated. You can imagine when it came out. And so the result of an outdated statute is that tech companies are in the position of having to fill in the blanks as technology advances, but tries to comply with words that were written before the advent of any of these things. And so that results in like lawyers like myself being in a position of having to interpret it in a way that is compliant with the law, hopefully favorable to the user. Most tech companies, like entire business models, are predicated on the privacy of users utilizing their platforms, right? Like if that doesn't exist, then there's no trust between the company and the user. The business model kind of falls apart in a lot of ways. And so the lack of understanding by governments is really concerning, actually, and the lack of regulation by governments is concerning, because then we're in the position of having, we individual people like policy specialists and paralegals and attorneys and engineers are in the position of having to do the best that they can in interpreting the statute, which falls really short and sometimes has negative outcomes in a way that still protects the user and still guarantees the advancement of these technologies. And the reason that is so concerning in the AI and storytelling world is because it can disproportionately impact minorities, and it can disproportionately impact people who don't have the understanding that they should have. Like, what does the average person really know about, like, when you input something into AI, who gets it, who sees it? And are minority communities more concerned about their data being accessed? Does it make them more nervous to use these tools? And what can we do about it? So that's what I think about on a day-to-day basis. It's what governs a lot of my decision-making, my colleagues' decision-making, as we work within an incomplete legal world to try to make a law, follow a law, have a policy that makes sense. I might hand it over to Sophia to talk a bit more about this, because I feel like that impacts a lot of what you work on a day-to-day.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the problem is that a lot of tech companies are trying to balance accountability with innovation. The speed of innovation is happening so quickly, the regulations haven't caught up with it. And governments all over the world are grappling with this, right? So you have some governments that have an open AI system, like in India, which create an open stack. It's public, it's accessible. And then you have some governments that don't. Who gets access to that data? Who gets access to input to that data? Who is building the stack? Is it people that look like us? Is it people who are part of marginalized communities? And so those are the questions that tech companies are grappling with, and governments are also grappling with them as we speak. So I was in New Delhi a couple weeks ago, and there's this global declaration, AI declaration, that came out, which governments, I mean, it's a non-binding document signed by 88 countries, which basically says we should all abide by these underlying framework principles, which are a non-binding. And so there's no sort of regulatory framework that guides. I mean, there's Brussels right now, which has come out with the EU AI Act, which is very restrictive in some ways. But then you have that reverberating in other markets and other countries looking at that model. But right now, there are very few countries that actually regulate AI. And who's being part of that consultation process? Are you talking to marginalized communities? Are you asking them how AI is impacting, like, how does this impact your community before you're writing the code? And I think those are the key questions that we're talking to tech companies about how they grapple with. And I think it's really about governments. We've worked in government, and so we understand the sort of pace of government, even though this administration moves quickly. I think there's the lack of inability to keep up with the pace of innovation. And that's what tech companies are grappling with. I think tech companies will also tell you they want guardrails. They want to know what those guardrails are, and right now we don't have them.
So, a question to all of you about this. Like everybody keeps saying, okay, tech companies want guardrails. You know, in about 15 years ago, I remember there was discussions that we were having in the Senate and in the House in DC about guardrails around tech companies. And the tech companies did not want any guardrails. They didn't. And now they're claiming that they actually do want guardrails. I'd love to pose the question to you all. Are tech companies sincere? Like, is there a level of sincerity other than the public discourse about wanting guardrails, about actually wanting equity and representation when it comes to all of these, the algorithms and everything that they're actually building out? I mean, I'm going to be honest, I know government doesn't. Each government wants to lead. I mean, I will be very honest. There's no way any government wants equity and equality in that space. They want to be the number one. They want to dominate the space. They want to make sure that they're leading. Our tech companies, and all of you have some experience in that space. Are they actually sincere about that?
Well, I'll start because I escaped the tech space. So, so as someone who got out, I was there at so right after the Christchurch massacre happened in New Zealand,
Which was live streamed.
Which was live streamed on Facebook at the time.
Yeah.
And they were told that, just for context, for those of you who weren't aware, there was a horrific massacre in a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, in which someone with a manifesto that was printed also and circulated prior to the attack. Sorry, I can't remember the number of people who were killed, but it was a devastating number of people who were massacred within this mosque, and it was being live streamed. And then it was not taken down for some time, not taken down in a time that was timely enough manner that people were comfortable with in any regard. So this is after Twitter, I worked at the World Economic Forum, and I was part of a discussion that was being held after the G7 that was taking place in Paris, and Prime Minister Ardern had called together the heads of all technology companies. Not the heads of, sorry, she did call for the heads of. What she got was the government relations person for each of the tech companies.
The lobbyists for
yes, who would be more comfortable probably sitting at a table with a prime minister discussing these matters. And what you heard was a lot of the reality of what it is, the difficulties of being a tech company, and how particularly at that time, things do get away from you, like you were saying. Sorry, the technology, supersedes our ability to control it sometimes, and so there was that as an issue. But just things like not sending, when your prime minister calls for the heads of the technology companies to we've done it in Canada. The Parliament has asked the heads of tech companies to appear in front of it. They don't come, and so I think there is a question as to whether. How much, because I think to your point you were making there off the top, it's, yes, they want guardrails because they want to understand that there's a framework that everybody's working within, but they don't want to have to deal with that framework, and they don't necessarily agree with it. At the World Economic Forum, we put together something called GARM, which is the Global Alliance for Responsible Media. Horrible acronym, but that was what we came up with. And to your point, it was the non-enforceable guidelines as to what was considered to be responsible media, and getting everybody to agree that they would somehow adhere to what was irresponsible and misinformation that was being published on their either platforms or whatever they were representing. The only reason we got the tech companies to the table was because it was driven by WPP and all of the other ad agencies who said, we're not going to spend money with you guys anymore unless you come to the table. So so I've been through enough of these experiences to see how it's a dance back and forth with how much a tech company really wants these guardrails. To be able to inform them so they can make the proper decisions, absolutely. And I do believe that there are good people within these companies trying to do that. It's whether the overall, whether the leadership is truly.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated when people say non-binding. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, even statutes that are binding governments and companies don't follow. But so when something is non-binding, I don't understand how companies. So I'd love to hear from you.
I would just say, look, I think companies, at this point in time, what I continue to hear from tech companies is that they do want those guardrails, because what happens if they're not a part of informing what those guardrails look like, then the governments then impose them on them. Like if you look at what's happening in Australia right now, there's an online safety regulations which don't allow, like, ban social media for kids under 14 years old right now, which as a parent of a 14-year-old, I have to say I kind of agree with this. But they don't want to see that coming out and them having to deal with how they have to respond to those sorts of regulations. And they've already put out products. They've already put out, these sorts of things, and then they have to roll those back. It's much more expensive if you know what those guardrails are and you're a part of complying with them from when they're being built, as opposed to governments imposing them on you. And this is going to continue. We're going to continue to see this all over Europe. President Macron just said he wants to do the same thing in France. So these things they continue. There is a domino effect that we're going to see around some of these regulations, because like I said, as the tech has innovated so quickly, we're seeing the harmful effects of some of this technology on children, on humanity, and the same thing is happening with AI, right? It's such a powerful tool that we haven't fully understood the impacts of it, that I think without those guardrails and without all of our communities being a part of informing what those guardrails look like, Black and brown communities, indigenous communities, women, all of us being a part of that conversation, it's not going to be a holistic solution.
Yeah, that's a really fantastic example of a regulation being made and then a company kind of having to respond to it, and it would be easier in the reverse. I'll add another example that comes kind of directly from the statute, which is the statute governing the disclosure of your data essentially says that companies can't give it unless it meets certain exceptions. Your content is pretty heavily regulated, so it can only be disclosed if there's a search warrant, if it's pursuant to a treaty, if there's a serious emergency, and a number of other things. And the search warrant exception is pretty relevant here to the example that I'll give. So essentially, if you need someone's content, let's say a crime happened, someone committed a murder, and you need to figure out if they were talking or planning about doing that murder, and so you want to go get their Gmail contents, or you want to go get their Instagram messages or Twitter, whatever, Apple iMessages, you are going to go to court and you're going to ask a judge to find probable cause, sign the search warrant so that you can go get that data. You pretty much can't get that data unless you have that. And so the people that can go get that data and can go get a search warrant are prosecutors. And the people that can't get that data are criminal defendants, because they don't have the ability to go to court and get a search warrant and have it signed by a judge, et cetera, right? Criminal defendants are essentially being represented by regular civil lawyers with no law enforcement abilities. And so there's a disparity in the availability of information that is not regulated by the law. The law is silent on that. And what happens is that this gets litigated in court, right? There's a court right now in California that another tech company I won't name just litigated, and an extremely sympathetic case, right? Criminal defendants are minorities, they're disenfranchised communities, they don't have access to data and information. If they're locked out of their two-factor authentication, how do they go in and get their emails? They can't. And so if they think there's exculpatory evidence, they're trying to get it and they can't get it. And so there's a very kind of sympathetic case in California last year where a criminal defendant was trying to get their information. They couldn't, got litigated. Judge said, you can get the information. This statute doesn't apply to electronic communications providers. And that means that now anybody can get anybody's data because the statute is not applying to these providers. And that's bad. But it is equally bad, right? Or it could be equally bad, I'm not saying anything definitive, that criminal defendants can't get their information. And so that is a perfect example of the tension that exists between the lack of regulation and what a tech company might want to do and what they have to do. And you'll see, this is public, you'll see Google, Apple, Microsoft, they all filed amicus briefs in these cases because they were this, you can't repeal the whole statute, but you really need a legislative fix. And they say it, it's in the amicus brief. They're like, you regulate this, like you, the state of California, you, Congress, you, whoever, you regulate this. You want it to be equal access, make it equal access, but don't create a law that makes it impossible for us to be caught in the middle of trying to do the right thing, but not kind of eviscerate the protections for everybody else at the same time.
I think if the question you're asking, Harrison, if I look at it in a bigger picture, is whether technology companies are serious about regulation, then I think you have to follow the money.
Yeah.
And when you look at, particularly in the States, around election fundraising, did the money go towards the people who were most asking for regulation?
Yeah.
You know,
No, that's 100%. Now, so this a lot of this conversation is around storytelling, and I want to kind of pivot back from regulation to storytelling. Inclusive storytelling is not just about output, but it's also building the tools to allow people to be able to tell those stories, right? And I'd love to hear from you all. What responsibility do tech companies have? Creators, policymakers, tech companies, people who actually are in charge of the data and do the input, what responsibilities do they have to create systems that create equitable design and storytelling in AI? So what's that responsibility for us to be allowed to create a more equitable storytelling kind of environment in these tech companies?
well, I think you can tell. I think the most kind of telling part of that question is what can they do to help? Because I think some of the questions, we can see that there has never been, when it comes to the world of storytelling, we haven't done a good job in history of telling equitable stories. We have not done a good job at raising diverse voices. This has just been, we have not done well in that field at all.
So are we replicating the same biases that exist
exactly.
outside?
So and again, I know people have discussed this, and I know this came up like years ago when we first talked about AI and the access of what the bias was going to look like, because it's all about what data is being used to inform these models as they're created, and they can only use existing data, and of course existing data is incredibly biased and prejudiced, and I think at the time, this was years ago, I was asked to come to a women in AI conversation, but 5 or 6 years ago, and they had already determined at that point that even if you were trying to change the bias today, just on the scepter of gender,
right,
you would never catch up.
Wow.
But that was then, and there are now ways that AI is even teaching itself to be better. So that's what you hope will start to happen. There's a whole layer of when you're training the AI models that brings into kind of the human element. The acronym is I think it's RH FLP. It's the idea that you take a look at the models that's being built and humans interact with it so that it changes the model as it's being built. And so the question is, are the people who are doing that informing the right people? Do they come from diverse backgrounds? Do they come from real stories that need to be told? Like, that's, I think, the question.
Yeah, and are the tech companies actually diverse enough to be able to create those models and systems?
Not it on this.
I'll jump in. I think there's work to be done from the tech company's perspective. I think there's a couple things that are really troubling that I think from the AI perspective, like if you look at facial recognition technology and the impact of mischaracterization for Black and brown faces, Asian faces, I think the false positives are around like 10%. I think Black women and Black men is like exponential. I don't know the data, but it's like the facial recognition technology has a long way to go when it comes to that. So you have to put in protections and audits for those sorts of things. Right now, I don't think we have that. I think there's pending legislation around that that prevents AI from sort of this automating historical biases around the facial recognition technology. So there's some things that I think when you ask, how can we improve on this? There's things that can be done which bring in that human element, that human factor. I talked about democratizing the AI stack. The reason why I talk about this is because we forget that there's still like broadband deserts in America. People still go to McDonald's for AI. I mean, for broadband, for internet, for Wi-Fi, and some McDonald's for AI. People go to McDonald's for Wi-Fi, and they talk about this as how there's still communities who don't have Wi-Fi in their homes who will come to their restaurants for internet access, students, college students. And so think about those communities who are just getting access to Wi-Fi. How are those communities going to get access to all of the AI tools that many of us have access to? So there's still a huge disparity. Forget emerging markets, forget global markets, here at home and in our own communities where we have broadband deserts.
So on this point, Sophia, I'd love to ask you further, because this is really important. Elon Musk always talks about the fact that AI is going to be like the great equalizer in the world, and everybody will be equal because AI will help. Now, if people don't even have access to broadband, there's broadband deserts in this country, and then in so many parts of the world. Is this introduction of AI in the workforce, in the education space, in all of these, in Hollywood, in storytelling, is it going to further create the economic divide? Is it going to accelerate that divide? I'd love to put that to all of you.
Yeah, I mean, I can go first. I think you are definitely going to see disparities in those who have access to the technology and those who don't. You're also going to see a disparity in the impact of AI to the labor force. This is something governments are really grappling with. I think the founder of Anthropic, Dario, said that the majority of white-collar workers are going to be impacted in the next 1 to 5 years by AI. And what does that do to those workers, right? And so I think it vastly is going to impact the workforce. I think it's vastly going to impact the haves and the have-nots, which create a whole set of other issues for our democracy.
And I think we just seen in Hollywood a couple of strikes that were trying to bring attention to the fact, both the SAG-AFTRA and the writer's strike. They're very concerned. Like the question around who is getting displaced by AI in the creation of content, because of course then you have that the funnel then just starts to narrow even more so, and it's already been a challenge to get these diverse stories out there. Now that you've got AI as the kind of substitute and the pressure on writers' rooms, for example, to reduce the number of writers in the room. You'll always find in this kind of capitalist Hollywood structure this sense of we are in dire straits. Our finances are not good. We're in a highly competitive marketplace. Therefore, we're always going to go to the middle, and the middle leaves out the top and the bottom, and a lot of the bottom is being left out. So you see in both the unions who were trying to call attention to these issues during their last strikes, they could see already in their numbers the displacement of minority representation in both of those fields, because it's the first thing the AI has been replacing.
Did you have any thoughts on that, Noha?
It's just such a tough issue because the models train themselves, and so the more that minority communities utilize them and have access to them, the more that the models will be able to account for those views and opinions. And I don't have a good answer for it other than to say, in my experience, companies are hyper aware of this and hyper concerned about it. I don't think it's something that the people that are making this technology are kind of just glossing over. I think it's something that people are critically thinking about and trying to find a way to counter it, but it falls short.
Yeah, I'm a layperson, so I don't know the storytelling and writing field. I wonder, are we going to have SNL writers in like 5 to 10 years, or will they just be writing? Will AI be writing the jokes for the performers on SNL?
Well, AI is in the writer's room now. Like AI is in every creative room and it depends on the extent to which you use it.
Right.
Some people use it to spur ideas and conversation in order to get their writers or their creators moving in towards and kind of doing the more grunt work. Like I think there is a sense of like what are you using AI for, and then in what context are you using it, and what do you understand the AI is giving you in that moment. We heard on the last panel the question around like the kind of responsible use of AI is always you have to question it back. You can't just presume that the answer you're getting from AI is the answer you should be getting. And I know that the example, I'm sorry to refer to the last panel, but it was a good discussion around the fact that you can get a very kind of white guy answer out of AI because that's most of the data and most.
That's what I usually get when I'm.
That's what's been informing the build of the models.
Right.
You know, and you know, I'm afraid to say, or I'm sorry to say, but it was ever thus. Like at CBC, at the Canadian Broadcasting Corp, one of our shows that was produced and went around the world to quite international acclaim was a show called Little Mosque on the Prairie.
I remember that.
Now, Little Mosque, there was no AI at the time that we created Little Mosque on the Prairie, and you do hear terrible stories about the kinds of information you can pick out, particularly about the community, because the community has not been there to inform in a majority sense, the information that comes out of AI. So it would have been interesting to see what would have happened in that world. But I do know what was in that writer's room was a Muslim for Dummies book.
Wow.
So you know, it's gonna these things. It was ever thus. Like, and so I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that we step up and look to the information that we're getting. And if AI is the tool that's going to be giving you the information in the moment because it's faster or because it's more is more in depth in terms of how it spurs the imagination, then absolutely, like, use it as a tool, but know what you're using when you use it.
And it's also self-improving, right?
Yeah.
So the more you use it, the more it could replace you, but also the further it's getting advanced in terms of its thinking and the mental modeling and the way that it's developing and the answers that it's giving. So if our communities are not part of that building out phase, then in the next year, where is it going to be without the voices, without our voices?
So we're going to open it up to the audience now, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to ask a last question, so please prepare your questions to the panel. What does advocacy look like in making sure that we have a more equitable space? What does that look like? How do we advocate towards tech companies, governments, publicly? What does that advocacy look like? I'd love to hear from you all, and then we'll open it up.
I'll talk about it from an internal perspective. I really love seeing people that look like me, look like other, minority communities, like at these companies. I think like that's kind of where it all starts. And so I'm a big fan of encouraging people to go into these corporate spaces that sometimes people don't want to go into and don't want to touch. And there's a lot of advocacy that can be done from the outside, and I'll hand it to my colleagues up here who can speak about it more. I've always kind of been in the corporate space with one foot trying to stay in the human rights space in some way, and there's a lot of guilt that I've had about that, but at the same time, I think those are the people that are at the forefront of developing these tools. And so one way to help change this and one way to move the needle forward is to encourage folks that look like us or from more disenfranchised communities to enter these spaces, to do them at the highest levels, and to be part of advancing these technologies.
I'll just echo that, Noha, because I think what you said is really, really important. And this is what I love about MPAC is we emphasize how important it is to have a seat at the table. And we get criticized for it a lot from our community. Haris and I both worked in government, and you're not going to love 100% of government policies when you're a part of an organization like that. I help tech companies, and I help all kinds of companies, and I'm oftentimes telling them, giving them advice as an external advisor on geopolitical factors and how to navigate boycotts in the Middle East and how to deal with these issues. But I think for our communities, we have to have a seat at the table inside these companies, because there are people like Noha who are pushing for these companies to do the right thing, and it's not easy for them. Yeah. And there's also people like Haris and I who are pushing inside government to do the right thing, and it's not easy at that point either. But if we're not having a seat at the table, then those voices aren't being heard at the end of the day. And so I think that's really, really important, and I think you need voices on the outside and you need voices on the inside to shift and change policies for the betterment of our communities. And so I think we have to have them all. It's not a mutually exclusive thing. I think advocacy, I think there's people across the spectrum who want to do the right thing, and they're unsure of what that looks like. And so I think being open to having conversations with different types of people with different ideas, and being open to those ideas and bringing them back to the table is really, really important. And that's what being an advocate is. And so I'm oftentimes reminding people when they come to me about how do I navigate this boycott for my U.S. company in the Middle East. And I'm like, well, let me tell you, I'm Muslim, so let me tell you how your brand is perceived. And they don't like that. But I'm like, once you hear from me and you hear what I'm telling you, it will help your business. It will help you grow. It'll help you become a better company. And companies are willing to hear it. So I think that's how I serve my purpose as an advocate.
Kristen?
I think in some ways from the outside, and I think these are fantastic points, and I think the opportunity to change from within is huge, and I think that it can't be said enough how important it is that the work you do when you're working from the inside to make change is not easy. Yeah. Corporations as a whole, tend to be incredibly rigid. Governments, even more so. To be able to work from the inside is incredibly powerful. I think from the outside, I think the way you can convince people to do the right thing is to make your stuff undeniable. Like make it that your story is the one people want to hear. Make it, tell things authentically. Tell the stories that people, we see it. People are breaking through. There's someone who just released a film. He's from a diverse background. He just released a film using YouTube only and beat all box office for the weekend. Wow. There are tools out there. It's going to be still the exception, not the rule. But the more the exceptions start to crowd the marketplace, then they become the rule. And so make doing good stuff undeniable.
Wonderful. Please go ahead. Our first question.
Hello. I had a question on the kind of regulation legislation.
Can you introduce yourself as well?
Hi, my name is Kashif. I'm a filmmaker. And I had a question on the regulation and legislation side. So I'm a new American, right? So from Canada, born and raised, so CDC represent. But so this is the first time I'm going to be able to vote. Is this year? And so, as a newer American, I might be just underinformed about this. This might be a really basic question, but I'll ask anyways. It seems to me like, just from observation, that like a lot of American law happens at the state level first, and then it kind of like expands out. Like the auto industry, it's like what happens in California, I think just spread out and right to repair and stuff. So I'm in LA. I don't have any influence in DC, but we have local elections coming up in LA, I think in June. And I can definitely get in front of like city councilors or state representatives and stuff. So what kind of things on kind of that more local or state level can individuals advocate for that might like help create a better foundation for better regulation at a federal level?
That's actually a really good question, because there is a tension between states and the federal government right now, right? As you talk about data centers and all of these different issues, what can we do on a local level in terms of organizing? That'd be helpful to hear from you all.
I can jump in, but
yeah,
Haris,
please.
I welcome your thoughts too, because you do this for MPAC a lot. You're absolutely right. State policies and state regulations are being formed on a lot of these issues, and then they escalate up to the federal level. So right now we're seeing AI policies around data centers, right? Data centers impact communities at the grassroots because of the energy uses. Energy bills will go up, the impact on the communities on where they're being built. So AI has a real impact on local communities, and so where big tech companies are putting data centers, you're seeing communities at City Hall, like at council meetings, come out and speak about the impact of this on their communities. And that's the pushback, that's the advocacy that happens at the state level. And I think that percolates all the way up to the federal level when the federal government is thinking about regulations around restrictions on data center policies. And so it definitely takes place at the state level, and it's something that our communities should be active in. They should be raising their voices. They should be going to these meetings. I always say that my parents are always like, oh, we vote every 4 years. And I'm like, no. You got to vote. In all the local elections, you got to vote for the school superintendent. You got to vote for the local council members, because those are the ones that actually impact your daily life in a much more impactful way. So definitely agree that a lot of these policies are emanating from the states, and California is, at least on climate and energy issues, much more progressive in some ways, but definitely something to definitely reiterate your point on.
Any thoughts? No. So I'll share an experience with you that I had this week on Tuesday in New York City. I met with a tech executive in New York City, and the conversation around inequality, inequity came up. And so I was very honest. I said, what can, because he's a conscious tech executive, so he's kind of thinking through some of the issues. And so I was really blunt with him. I said, so what can communities actually do to push back and to advocate at the local level? His response was really interesting to me. He said, revolution. He literally said revolution. And then we had a conversation about it. But I think what he meant was you really need local organizing on this issue. It just cannot work at the federal level, right? You need communities who are being impacted on a daily basis, whose stories are not being told, right? Whose life experiences are not being reflected in the stories and in the algorithms and all. And I think, I don't know if as a society here, we're at a place where we're organizing around tech the same way. There are probably some really amazing, and Zach can talk a little bit more about this because he really was in this space, but there are some amazing national organizations who are organizing around digital equality and inequality. But we're not organizing at the local level right now. And your question is so important. How do you organize at the local level to be able to kind of talk to city council folks, to talk to state legislatures before even going up to the national level? Because even some of the tech policy changes that are happening at the state level, not the federal level. Places like Utah are talking about like child safety policy, right? In California, in Arizona, it's happening at the state level. None of that is actually happening in Congress in Washington, D.C.
And maybe I can just add one thought that I wanted to bring up is, as consumers, the fact that what we spend on has a huge impact on the industry. So, for example, given all of that's happening with Anthropic right now, and the stand that they're taking against the U.S. government, they have more than 1 million new subscribers to Claude on the App Store every day. I
unsubscribed from ChatGPT.
So people are doing this, where they're unsubscribing from ChatGPT and they're subscribing to Claude because of Anthropic's moral position, their branding on doing their ethical thing around the government's use of AI in warfare. And that, I promise you, is getting noticed by OpenAI and how their business model is looking at the growth of Claude is now the #1 app in the Apple App Store over ChatGPT, or Claude is. Now that is sending a message as a brand, as a business, by consumers. And that is being noticed by those executives, I promise you. And so that's something that each of us individually can do.
Is it being noticed even though OpenAI, like the same night, they kind of jumped in and took the Department of Defense, Department of War contract? Is it still being noticed?
I think you saw Sam Altman come back and say he shouldn't have. He issued a statement and said he shouldn't have. It was very opportunistic and it was bad timing. And you've had several OpenAI employees jump from OpenAI to Anthropic. I mean, right now there's a battle for talent, and companies are battling right now for that talent. And those two rivals are sort of pushing against each other, and the fact that because Anthropic has taken this stand, they're seeing their valuations go up as a business, and so those things are being noticed by those companies.
Kristen, I'd love to come to you about storytelling, because that's kind of where you've really focused a lot of your career on and your experience. How can communities organize? And what can communities actually do and engage a lot of these tech companies and digital companies in terms of creating more equitable storytelling platforms? You were at Twitter. Twitter's an interesting case. Elon Musk kind of came in and said he's equalizing the platform. And now you've got like Nazis on Twitter. You've got like white supremacists on Twitter, and it's really impacting the conversation around digital equality and storytelling. I just saw a poll last week, 54% of Republican staffers and Republican kind of hardcore Republican members believe that Jews are a threat to America, and a lot of that comes from the narrative that's put out on Twitter. Like, what can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's interesting to relate it to the value of Twitter right now, though. Like when you think about, like to your point, the people kind of speak, right? Like I think the number of people who have jumped off the platform and have kind of left the rest of it to be, to be whatever it is today, is just. It's been remarkable, actually, the transformation of how, and sad for someone like myself and others who were part of the original, the Twitter OG, who kind of were probably, in some cases, at least I had come from, at that point, broadcasting, where I'd seen the challenge of trying to create an open platform where you could have unfettered discussion, because unfortunately, in the space of being in broadcast, particularly in news, you did see bad actors try to infiltrate things and change conversations and impose their biases onto people and kind of use these platforms or these open dialogues for bad. They didn't see it as such in the early days of something like Twitter. They were very blue sky, like not to use that, take that name, but like they really did think that they were changing the world for good, that they were democratizing a platform to be able to give everybody access to a mic, and didn't think about things like digital deserts, didn't think about things like there was. The point at which it came a challenge for me to be at Twitter was when I was responsible for all of the kind of content platforms that were under Twitter. So entertainment, news, sports, all of those folks. And so any partnerships that, to bring people onto the platform to create content in those areas, we had these great teams that would work on, showing people the great tools that you could use on Twitter to get your message more broadly across. And we were helping train people in the use of Twitter. It wasn't too long before you could see people misusing it. Yeah. And when you put your hand up internally, because this is how we all know how hard it is to make change from within, it didn't get met with a serious response. And so as a result, you saw a lot of people internally leave Twitter at that time. And so, I think the way that we can, as communities, when you think about at the time, Black Twitter was a huge driver of conversation and great content, and it really kind of it was a foundational piece of what Twitter was based on.
And the Arab Spring as well.
There's opportunities there for communities, for groups to actually coordinatedly, impose themselves on things. Right. And again, make your success undeniable, make your stories irrefutable. You have to be persistent, and it's horrible that you have to work 10 times harder than anybody else to do so. But again, it was ever thus, and I think this is, there could be an opportunity here to get it right, though.
Wonderful. So in 1 minute or less, I'd love for each of you to send a message. Oh, do I have another question? I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Please, go ahead.
Well, this might be a bit complicated, so I don't want to stretch this out too long.
It's okay.
This whole discussion, also about governance, internal government systems, internal corporate systems, and this whole conversation that we just had about kind of Twitter and the abandonment of Twitter, and kind of what we were just talking about with OpenAI, I find myself kind of like, to take a stand is great, and to leave a toxic system is great, but then it still exists almost as a triply reinforced echo chamber of its own toxicity. Mm-hmm. And so what is the balance? Like, we see a lot of US government workers now just kind of needing to leave a system that they do not feel that they can make any positive change within. But then at the same time, that leaves a gaping hole open to reinforce toxic echo chambers, and no one is kind of fighting the good fight, from my perspective, internally. And so what is that balance of abandoning a system that you feel cannot be saved, but knowing that like when you leave, the system still exists, and in some ways, perhaps the absence of your presence, you know, down
Yeah.
the line, like we now have very separate spheres of existence and influence for very different types of people. And for them, that is their reality, and it's the thing that they live in and use every day. And other people are living in an entirely different reality. And I don't actually know what the question is. It was just, yeah.
In less than a minute, can I get a response to that? She's essentially saying we're creating echo chambers and we're not listening to each other. And if we leave these spaces, what happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really tough decision that we all probably have to face, right? It's sort of like, am I here to be a part of this system, or do I leave and stand my ground based on my principles? I think for me, the litmus test is, am I being heard? Are diverse voices being heard as a part of the conversation? And can I still be an advocate and push for the issues that I care about inside? And I think currently in this administration, that voice of dissent is oftentimes, you're unable to actually to do that. And I've worked in administrations where you can disagree, and they're actually, you're pushed to disagree because disagreement is what yields the best result. And so I think that's really, for me, the question is, am I actually being heard if I can disagree with you?
Great.
I couldn't agree with that more. I think we all, at some point or another, you know, when you're working as a human being in any situation, you come across challenges to your own value system, and you have to decide whether it's, you know, how much can you stand up and fight, and how much is it time to kind of close up and go home. And I think, to your point, it is about whether you're being heard or not. Are you being effective? Can I be effective somewhere else? Yeah. But I do agree with you. I think we all are very much concerned about the spaces we leave behind, or the places that other people leave behind. And, you know, echo chambers, you know, you find in certain societies, and I think the U.S. is very kind of vulnerable to this. The division, the need for confirmation bias. As a former news broadcaster, or responsible for news broadcasting, you could see it. You could see that if you were trying to maintain a level of neutrality, you pleased neither side. Because people really just wanted to hear what they wanted to hear in many ways. The majority of people, not everybody. So, you know, echo chambers are very, very dangerous. We slip into them very, very easily, certain cultures more than others. And it's something that I think people are always trying to figure out how to fight, but perhaps leaving the toxic situation and trying to build a better future is the only way that you can see right now through.
No, final thoughts.
I'll just add that I take comfort in the fact that it's like temporal, and that it's fine to have, this is how I think about it, that it's fine to sort of have a negative kind of a void for a little bit, because it always cycles back, because there are red lines that I think can't be crossed, but I'll just leave it there.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Please, a round of applause for amazing panelists. Thank you so much. And we hope to continue this conversation. And tonight, we do have an iftar meal tonight that's open to the public. So please join us this evening. Do we have a room that we... Oh, right over here. Okay, great, on this floor right here. So thank you so much for joining, and appreciate your participation. Wonderful.
Thank you, Hart.